whether you laugh or not.
We're back. That was President Obama Saturday night joking about something that appears to be all too true. The Senate's moving full steam ahead on Wall Street reform, and some Democrats want to get tougher on the biggest banks. Delaware Senator Ted Kaufman is the Vice President Biden's successor in the Senate. He sits on the Government Affairs Committee. Thank you, Senator Kaufman. It's the first time you've been on the show.
Yeah,
you know,
Chris,
I wonder whether you have a special advantage coming into the Senate without the need to fundraise. I mean, one of the, I guess the right word is sickening parts of your wonderful role in life right now that you don't have to play is to sit in your car out on the plaza making phone calls during roll calls. You don't have to do that with your colleagues. Is that giving you an edge against these Wall Street characters?
Well, I think it's given edge. There's a time, but I'll tell you, Chris, you know, I've been involved in a lot of campaigns, I've done a lot of politics. I haven't done a single thing yet that I wouldn't do if I was running this time. Especially on this issue. This issue, I'm telling you, just politically, there's nothing hotter out there right now. And I'd give my opponent, if I were running this year, all the money in the world in a state the size of Delaware, because I tell you, people are coming up to me on street corners. It's amazing. I was in Acme on Saturday. There were like 20 people. I was just coming in to pick up some stuff. 3 different people came up and said, keep after it. Keep what you're doing, Senator. We love what you're doing. So I think politically, maybe true on a lot of issues, but on this one, clearly the political thing to do is the right thing to do.
Well, the fact that you don't have to fundraise on Saturday means you can go to the Acme, or as we say in Philadelphia, as we say in Philly, just across the river, the Acme. Anyway, according to the AP, these 6 banks have assets now that total more than 60% of the nation's GDP. Bank of America, J. Paul, Morgan Stanley, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley. Is there such a thing as too big to fail in your lights?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The fail part, I think the bill does a good job on the fail part in terms of resolution. I make some changes in that. But the big problem is the too big piece. And like you say, today they're 63% of the assets. Just 15 years ago, they were 17% of the assets. They now 85. Over-the-counter derivatives we're so concerned about, 85% of them are with the 5 major banks. So these banks are clearly too big. They're too complex. They have relationships around the world. Resolving them under the best of circumstances would be a very difficult thing. We don't need their economies of scale. There's a fellow named Haldane, who's the executive director of the Bank of England. He came out, he said $100 billion, that's the maximum. Even Alan Greenspan, that didn't get much right, has come out and said the economies of scale are much, much more in our present banks.
But aren't the lobbyists from these big interests down in Washington right now working against any move to break them up?
It's really strange. They are, I'm sure, but they're not contacting me. Maybe they just know that I'm beyond hope or persuasion. But it's not that. I think what we have to do is just get across to everybody that we're going to have too big to fail if we don't get down the size of these institutions. And not just that. Sheridan Brown and I have a bill that says we've got to limit how much capital any one bank has to 10%. We've got to limit what they have in liabilities as a percentage of their capital, which would be 2% for banks, financial institutions, 3% for non-financials, and we must limit the leverage. So even after we get too big and we get it down to there and shrink that down, and what I want to do, as you know, Chris, is reinstate Glass-Steagall that worked for 60 years. But even after we do that, we can cut down the size. Then the regulators can deal with it. But we have to have bright line marks on the size of these things and their liabilities.
Well, the big problem is the financial sector's gotten too damn big and too big a part of the GDP, where nobody's making anything, building anything, doing anything except making money. Last week with the Goldman hearing, let's watch you here. Here you are, sir.
At the time, things happened in the market and were accepted in the market that in hindsight look very different than they did at the time in the market.
I got 2 things I'm getting out of these hearings. Number one, nobody did anything wrong. This was a natural disaster like a hurricane hit. The mortgage market fell and nobody knew it and nobody forecasted it. And the second thing is that these things were just something that happened.
Do you think Geithner gets it? Every time I hear the Secretary of Treasury, he talks about the failure of regulators, the failure of government. Is he afraid to take a whack at the rich guys? And what's his problem? He doesn't seem to be on the side of the people against the big shots. He dresses like the big shots. He talks like them. And he's afraid to offend them. He said it's the little regulators that blow it. Wait a minute. When a criminal commits an act, you don't say the cop failed. You say the criminal committed the act.
Well, no, but that's
Isn't that the way we think in this country?
Well, but Chris, you got to remember, and I agree with you totally. I mean, especially after these hearings, there's 4 days of hearings we had that Carl Levin chaired in the Permanent Investigation Subcommittee. Now, you listen to Washington Mutual. Have you ever heard of a stated income loan, Chris?
Yeah, I have.
A stated income loan is you come into a bank And you say,
you make it up.
You make it up. And you want to know something? You want to know something? At Washington Mutual, 90% of their home equity loans were state income loans.
In other words, 90%. It was all BS. It was all BS. Thank you very much, Ted Kaufman, a free spirit,
hey, Chris.
A man who owes nothing to anybody, who will only be a senator for the people of Delaware. A rarity. Thank you, sir. When we return, we have some thoughts about the oil spill in the Gulf. You're watching Hardball, only on MSNBC.
The 3 Series exemplifies the essence of